So, welcome to the 2025 podcast. This is our first podcast in 2025. So, myself, Kriti, and this is Chetan and Guru. So, yes, sir. So, we'll be starting off with the podcast. So, sir, there's been a lot happening at Quoqo and especially outside the legal space. So, basically, the QFIN and the Synapt seem to be making more of waves. So, what's the perspective of yours on this, sir?
I think before we get into this, Guru, I think 2025 started with a big bang, correct? Both in terms of AI and the events across AI and also events at Quoqo, correct?
Yes.
And I think we should sort of like give viewers a perspective about what's happening in the AI world. I'm sure people have heard of DeepSeek and what's come out of China
Right.
and how it is open source and is cheaper and can beat so many things and things like that. So, I mean, where we left off with Code Counsel in 2024 was we were not even at an O1 level, correct? And it came to sort of OpenAI and things like that. But I mean, just to give viewers a perspective, in terms of large language models, in the size of these, if you go to Hugging Face, Guru, or if you generally investigate, you'll find a few large players, right? Got obviously OpenAI, which is open or closed source, depends on whom you ask, right? If you ask Elon Musk, he will say, I'm sure it's open source. But anyway, there's Claude by Anthropic. The 3.5 Sonnet is a superb LLM, correct? And then you've got Mistral, then you've got Microsoft's free, some math-specific models. There are many, correct, for all of these things. And then you have the ability to run some of these locally, using Olama or whatever you need, QFIN. I mean, by the way, China also has its own models. You've got QFIN, you've got DeepSeek V2, which came out, and there were hints around some of these things as well. But what's happened, I believe, is, depending on how you encode the LLM, right? It can either be text generation or a reasoning LLM.
Right.
And most of the OpenAI ones are reasoning LLMs and things like these, right? So, and what DeepSeek has come up is potentially an O1 competitor. And you remember, Guru, I told you like the day it got launched saying that I tested this and I thought that, it may or may not be production ready yet, at least, from where we are looking at things, and we might need something much more, and I thought that, my first inclination was OpenAI still had a lot of edge over some of these things from a production perspective in terms of our products and things like that. Why I'm giving this context is how things have changed. You've suddenly gone from a paid model deployed only on Azure and to a fully open source model where you can deploy on your servers, provided you have the ability to sort of like deploy these. But most people don't also realize saying that if I want to, you have different quantized versions of DeepSeek as well, correct? You may be able to run like a 1.2 billion on a local comp with say an 8-core GPU, but if you want the full length, if you want like the 64 billion, whatever they've done it with, correct, or 72, you need some really powerful machines, correct? So it's not something which saying, is it production ready? Is it something that you can sort of like immediately
Adopt.
I would not necessarily sort of like immediately jump at some of these things, correct? It really depends on the context, correct?
There, definitely takes some time to understand how the models are performing, how it can be used for certain applications, etc. But at least DeepSeek has been a ground, breaking, and it shatters everything, even the mindsets of people. Oh, you need a lot of resources to train a model. Oh, it's not possible for anyone outside the Europe or the USA to develop models. That's something that got shattered. Going in the direction, I think, no.
Yeah. So, but this I was talking to a VC recently, and I mentioned this saying, and I had read somewhere saying, and it was a proper sort of like encapsulation of the moment saying, an LLM has become a commodity, correct?
Right.
And it's basically on top of what you build is what really matters. And on top of what you build is essentially like a wrapper, but you don't need a VC to run a wrapper. right? You don't need it. Right? It requires an adoption. That's what I think. That's what you've done for Quoqo for a long time, right? So does it change the mechanics overnight? Saying, does it make it accessible? Is it something that I can do it before DeepSeek? Maybe not at a level of a reasoning model, but there were others as well, which did the tasks pretty competently. Correct. We have benchmarked. We have got our own QLLM, which we did it. We did not need a huge context model to be utilized. We trained on some things, and we thought that whatever the current state of requirements are, from a user in a production scenario perspective, is more than sufficient with what we have now. Correct. Now, if you're looking at a PhD level economics, just yesterday OpenAI came up with something where if you're a GPT Pro user spending like $200 a month, you've got like a PhD level output with
And you research reports and all this.
yeah, but then human ingenuity is something that you may not be able to replace. And I think DeepSeek, the way if you read that paper and the way that they've gone about sort of like adopting a non-CUDA architecture to be able to even sort of like develop that model, gone about sort of like used a very different way of looking at things. Correct. As you know, like if you're using GPUs, these are usually NVIDIA ones. The reason why AMD is also being left behind is the word adopts CUDA architecture for base level programming, and you don't find the same adoption in AMD or say an Intel GPU kind of like a scenario, right? So now we've gone about and created something else, correct, which can work in parallel. It looks at CUDA as a separate, or if it looks at a GPU as a separate sort of like an entity from which it can tap in and tap out. I mean, this is at a very simplistic level, not that also that I'm an expert at how they have come about doing this, but this involves sort of like some element of deep research, correct? But how does this all sort of like add up? And to Kriti's question, correct, saying got a lot of things that are coming up, and what is it? You've got some new products also coming up, correct? And what is it that she mentioned? QFIN Synapt. So just to give users an overview, if you go to our website, www.quoqo.com, then at that point in time, you will sort of, there are links to non-legal tech applications. So QFIN is a set of financial agents, almost 30 or 32 of them, that we built using our expertise on QBot that solves things like financial consolidation across subsidiaries, as an example. Okay. It's a huge problem. And it also, especially in large enterprises, it also works with audit sort of with auditing requirements in mind. So there are quite a few. You can also visit the subsite qfin.guru in Guru's honor. So and then look at it. Synapt is also an agentic AI process. We can assist with some custom development of agentic AI, very specific to a company's requirements as well. During development of QBot, if you remember, QBot is specific to legal tech in terms of having a conversational interface for legal specific data sets, right? So you've got QFIN, which is also agentic AI, not exactly in the same lines of QBot, but Synapt goes a little bit further, correct, and uses different models and different agents to be able to accomplish a number of different things as well. QFIN is advanced in the sense that it contains a lot of technology and a lot of different LLMs to be able to accomplish what it does. When you're doing financial apps, as you know, Guru or agents, the accuracy is a lot more
very important.
Yeah, important, correct? You try and run a Lavati point to a latest on a mathematical stuff like reasoning, it doesn't do well, correct? So, and it's not, I mean, we mentioned Llama, but it depends on, and we have our own thoughts around these. I don't want to make these because some of these are proprietary in how we test on these things as well. If you remember in the early days of GPT-2, you could convince the GPT that 2 equals 1 or 2 equals 0, and you could just sort of like load it up with so many things that it would be there. But I wanted to give users the ability to try out Synapt and QFIN. These are cutting edge agentic AI and fintech specific products. These are as cutting edge as probably DeepSeek, when it comes to functional sort of like use cases. And we believe like we are the first ones in the world sort of like create all of these things as well. And by the way, with QFIN, we can integrate into a number of different architectures in terms of also integrations, things like these, so that you can just plug and play. So this is our new thing, saying QFIN and Synapt are new things for Quoqo and developed by utilizing the know-how of how we do things on the legal tech side. And I wish some of you. And by the way, Guru, you want to speak about how enterprises are sort of like adopting these two things as well. Very recently,
Yeah, definitely. Recently, we had a demo to a very large company when they were looking at various use cases where they can read documents, extract information, how to put them into their own ERP systems, etc., and how they can use it because most of these activities have been manual for them, and they have seen the demo of some of these applications, and they have found them to be very interesting.
yeah.
So yeah.
And that was on QFIN side, correct? And that is probably going into deployment soon, as we know, correct? And also for Synapt, we had the opportunity to demonstrate a very large, financial services company that the work being done by about 24 analysts, is essentially sort of like can be automated to an extent with a lot more efficiency and also urgency as they required. Correct. I mean, it could execute tasks within, say, a 20-25 minute window, which is like an eternity in computer processing times, correct? Which people would take like, 24 people would take like a month to execute, essentially, right? So it's reaching a phase saying, it is possible to sort of like bring in a lot of efficiency, cost savings, right, into the process. Not that, that the human element is taken out of the mix, correct? But the human element can be focused on better tasks of analyzing what comes out of it rather than trying to dig for the information yourself.
Right.
Yeah, I think the better way to do this is, if you remember Alta Vista Group, which was the forerunner of Google, correct? If you try to run search on Alta Vista, it used to be a big thing, right? Saying that you are able to sort of like look at stuff and search for it. I think that is the use case in many enterprises right now. So the way they do things is at least about 35 to 40 years old. It has not been changed, and for a long time. And when you expose on these things, it's basically like it's like it's a paradigm shift in thinking, saying, there are better ways to do things, because as technology advances, reallocate resources, time and money, correct, for all of these things as well. So that is how some of the agentic AI systems are also sort of like scaling up. But sorry, it's a long-winded and sort of like a long monitor from my side.
Just also want to add how much we are using these applications in our day-to-day activities.
Yeah,
That's an important thing to highlight also.
I think within Quoqo and Kriti, you need to speak how you're using some of the agents that you have, correct, in your day-to-day work as well, correct? So
For that, sir, like you mentioned, like DeepSeek and O1. So I'm hearing many things from them, many people, like, they're comparing both of them. Like, what's the main difference between both of them, like DeepSeek and O1?
I think basically DeepSeek is also trained on OpenAI LLMs or responses. They claim that only about 830 of them were used, to sort of like train 830 responses from an API was used to train DeepSeek, correct, to the level, correct. They use a different way in which they use reinforced learning, correct.
They use a method called mixture of experts. Basically, they develop a small. It's like developing smaller LLMs and integrating them into a bigger umbrella. And based on the question that you ask, it basically activates that particular agent, which gives you the more pointed response. That's how.
So would it be right to say, Guru, is like, remember rote learning nowadays in schools it is not encouraged. But let's say you were to rote learn tables from 1 to 20, correct? That is used to basically develop your first language model, correct? And then you know how to multiply, right? Then you teach a child or a computer to go to the 21st table or the 35th table, correct?
Right.
And then you extend it, and then it figures out that you can do it, for infinity, correct, as well, correct? So, and the way that you can learn the table is multiple ways. You can do an addition, you can do a multiplication, correct? You can use squared methods, depending on, so our DeepSeek basically, it has explored one of the methods similar to this, in which it's like a thinking method. Is that right, Guru? Is that the right?
Another way of looking at it is, let us say there's a closed room in which there are multiple experts. There is a finance guy, there's a marketing, there is a sales guy, and all these different types of people. Now you're asking question, standing outside the room, and you'll get the correct answer because the person who is actually having expertise in that field is going to answer you. So that's basically how
when you are able to sort of like, but earlier you would use instruction based sort of like, you would have to change the context for an LLM through prompting to sort of like put it in a different frame and make sure that, but now even LLMs have also sort of like, you have the ability to add memory. So it's all, and also one of the things is, if you use, for instance, like 3.5, the early version of the turbo one, correct? As an example from OpenAI, correct? It would quickly lose context, right? And then it forget what. So some of those things are being tackled on a much better latest basis version. Yeah,
and they have larger context windows. They have better output token size.
Okay, we'll come to that. I have my own things on that. Correct, but
DeepSeek also, like, is it like very hard to implement in the local production?
Yeah, I have my own views on this, correct? Do you want to go first, Guru, or should I?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so see, when you deploy locally, correct, you're assuming that you have servers, correct, which are capable of running an LLM. So let us say you remember the logarithmic scale in school, correct? So you have, let's take the number 2. You have 2 squared, 2 cubed, 2 to the power of 4, 2 to the power of e, so on, right? So if you take 2 squared, you get a smaller number. If you take 2 to the power of 8, it's only large. If you take 2 to the power of 0, it becomes infinite, correct? Or 1 to the power of 0 or 0, whatever thing is. So, but what the point being that these are all quantizations, correct? So the larger, so you can take a very big model and take a sample of it, and you can run it on a smaller level computer. It only is like, I only know 2 to the power of 2, correct? But if you take 2 to the power of 64 or whatever, and this simplifying this, you have a very large number. To be able to compute, you do 2 to the power of 64 on your calculator app on your computer. It'll give you an error, it'll give you an infinity error, correct? So because beyond a certain point, the floating points, it goes beyond it goes beyond the FPU's ability to sort of like create such a large number, correct? But what happens is at that scale, you have a lot more information easily, which is not compressed. So from the LLM's perspective, you can access that information. There was a visualization from China about how an LLM sort of like operates different layers, correct? And how it's able to train and figure out what it is, right? In an uncompressed model, it has access to all of these, and it basically depends on the GPU's power to sort of like chunk out and be able to arrive at a computation that makes sense, correct? So it is like dealing with uncompressed files and dealing with compressed files. Yeah. And if you need to deal with a compressed file, it's going to take time for you to extract, open it. It may not have the same color accuracy. It may have removed a bunch of repeating repeating logos versus repeating colors as an example in a graphic and things like that, right? But in an uncompressed format, correct? It's got every pixel is a representation of an actual graphic, correct? So the color, our video editors, as an example, color accuracy is very, very critical for them. So they'll have to deal with uncompressed formats. And when you actually view this podcast, it's a compressed version of whatever it is. It's not the original, right? Similar to LLMs, you'll have differences in quality when you run all of these things as well. Now, back to your question, saying, is it easy to run all of these things? Why I said is, if you want to run the uncompressed version, it's going to take some very serious hardware. The infrastructure you need to have the proper servers, the GPUs, the data storage, and it's also a question of how fast all of these can do a token output, correct? If you are in a production grade environment where people let's say you get a token output of 20 tokens, correct? But your output window is 6,000 tokens. How long is it going to take you if you get 20 tokens per second,
right,
to figure out something which is 6,000 tokens? And each token, let's say, is about 13, 14 letters, correct? On an average, right? So it's going to take some time, correct? If you use our products, if you take Quoqo products, it's literally instantaneous, correct? Because we have the infrastructure to run some of these things as well. But the short answer is, unless you have the hardware necessary to run all of these things, and the hardware keeps progressing, correct? It's not that older hardware can't run or newer hardware is on the way forward. It really depends on what kind of application that you want and to whom you're catering to. For someone who is is able to wait, correct, then it is not mission critical, then you can wait, maybe to land in your inbox 1 hour later, as an example.
Or run it overnight and present the results maybe the next day or so.
That may be a case where you may want to run this, on older servers, lower servers, things like these. But then if you want to run this production grade environment and conforming to Gen Z standards of wanting everything instantaneously, right? Then you need something very, very spontaneous and very, very powerful.
Classic.
Yeah. I think that's
Very much.
so. And also to add to that, but see, depending on what you run, if you run things locally, you're also limited by something called an output window size. Correct. It really depends once again on the infrastructure.
Yeah.
You can change that, but most stuff running locally, if you use open source stuff to be able to run and then locally, limited about 2,000 tokens. Whether 2,000 tokens takes forever to generate also, depending on the hardware, correct? And if you want like an OpenAI research tool, correct, to generate like 15 pages, is going to take time. Even for OpenAI, it will take time, correct?
It's easily some 15 minutes, 10 minutes kind of.
Even for them, with those and if some of those things, I don't think locally you can run. You need like an entire server farm, correct, to be able to be able to handle complex tasks. Also, for shorter things, like you want a conversational bot as a fancy to run locally, I think it's great to have a locally running LLM. But anything more where, as an example, correct, we have like diligence project, or we have a product called diligence, where it can review so many things together and basically, come at a conclusion or help you arrive at a conclusion or an analysis on a transaction, as an example, correct? It may not be possible to run it with current output windows. It's like getting cut off mid-sentence. Okay. So you'll get a report, but what's going to happen is the computer is going to wait for some time for this output to come through. Then, the computer will wait for the time allotted and then say, okay, this is it. And then it has to complete the task, correct? You're dealing with at the end of the day, a machine, correct? The machine has like a start loop and an end loop, and this is essentially how it works in real life. But that's what I think, Guru. But Guru is a lot more.
Completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so different use case, it all depends on the use cases that you are working with. You want a repository kind of a tool where an AI repository like our legacy, where you can upload your documents and you expect the documents to be available maybe next day or probably later, so we can use local models with a very high level of quantization.
Correct.
But then if you want instantaneous results, a chatbot or some of those other use cases, some of these things may not be suited for the use case basically.
Correct. So maybe that is the long and short of it, saying the higher the quantization level, the lower the quality that it becomes, right? And the lower the hardware requirements,